I'll have some athletes where it's like, okay, like they could handle it. They're pretty good. And it's more of a direct conversation where someone, they may not respond well to it. So it's more like, okay, I'm not going to tell you directly that I think you're being soft, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to sprinkle in here and there things that'll push yourself physically and then things that may push yourself mentally and have those corrective actions.
I want the best for you. These are what you said your goals was. My job and what I want for you is for you to get to your goals. The way you're acting right now is not in alignment with those goals. So either we need to be realistic and change our goals, or you have to change the behavior.
Someone who is wrestling and they're in second grade, figuring out how to fight and how to like overcome obstacles and work hard is so much lower risk than the high school state finals. And it's like, you're going to want to have those skills when you get to that point. And if you don't have those skills because everything was done for you or was always like a fabricated situation to make sure you were succeeding, then you're actually never going to get to your true potential when the chips are down.
The fitness movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. We offer coaching and individualized program design, as well as educational content for coaches and athletes. It's all at one place, zorfitness.com.
Yeah, Day likes The Bachelor, so she's by nature a little bit softer.
Yeah, I'm a little soft.
Oh, gosh. Update us, Day. What happened with The Bachelor?
Well, you know what? We should do a whole podcast one day. I want Day to explain why she likes The Bachelor. And then you and I can just roll our eyes and
make a whole podcast. It'll be special edition, like 2-hour long Zor podcast.
Season finale.
Yeah.
Yeah. Why I like trash TV.
Why I like trash TV with Dave Munoz.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, today we're going to talk about people being soft. Or potentially not soft. And to me, being soft just means like you're not mentally engaged or pushing yourself when you need to be pushing yourself. Like you're taking the easy way out. To me, that's what being soft means. So there are times where that definitely applies to people. There are times where that probably does not apply to people, and we'll talk about both of those. But where do you guys see people being soft?
Oh man. I'll start with this one. I think in general, and I'm sure you guys can attest to this, like being a coach, he's working with big groups of people. You're going to find like those who come in every day and they put their head down and put the work through. And then people who come in and there's an excuse or all this stuff all the time, or they're not consistent and every little
I think
excuse.
you see it a lot in groups. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's groups like throughout, like any type of, and that, I wouldn't even say it's just fitness. I would say in like groups and everything in life, like at the workplace and all that stuff. That's usually where you kind of see like, okay, this person has never faced much adversity in their life. And if they have, they kind of wiggled their way out of it or haven't learned from it.
Chris?
So it's funny, before we got on, Ben's like, we could talk about this forever. I think, we did I think at Zor Camp about mental toughness, and I think or building a good mindset, I think it was called. And I think Dave kind of hit it on the head. Like you have people who are not consistent, or the adversity piece is really strong. Like if you've never been punched in the mouth, right? It's like the Tyson, right? Wasn't it Tyson who said everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth?
Yeah.
It's kind of that, you have people who are just never been punched in the mouth, whether it's in life or in sports or in school or whatever. And so they've never had to figure out what it takes to take that and keep on ticking. And then I hate to be like the society guy, but there is, I think, an element, like I've seen people in my life, like grown adults who are just like, man, that sounds really hard. I don't think I'm going to do that. And it's like, in my head, like that doesn't compute. Like the sole reason for you not doing something is because it sounds hard, instead of like what you could get out the back end of it, or what you could learn from it, or what the benefits are. It's just like, that sounds hard. I think I'm going to punt on that. And so I think that's kind of like a really, really soft mentality as well.
Yeah. This is super interesting because when I was thinking about this and was kind of drafting up some of our discussion points, I was thinking about it like, most of the people that I work with, the conversation's more about like, you need to like take it easy, like back up a little bit because you're being the opposite of soft. Like you're being too hard on yourself. Whereas, yes, that's the case sometimes, but that's probably just the population I happen to work with. Whereas like the average like gym goer who maybe not even like my affiliate, but just like across the world, average gym goer or just like, the average like youth sports athlete that I work with, like so many of those people, I'm just like, man, you would be so much better if you were just less soft. Like if you could just like truly, like honestly, it's like if they just worked a little bit harder, right? If they didn't think that they were like crushing it when they were actually just like not going that hard. Like they thought they did this like terrible workout and I was like, you barely broke a sweat. Like you're not even breathing that hard. Like this was not a hard workout. Like you've no idea what challenging really is. And maybe that's just and likewise there's other kids who like really get after it when they come in right away. If I'm thinking about like the youth kids I work with, like there's some kids who just like they come in, you don't gotta tell them anything, they go to work and like they're very detail oriented and they want to be at their best. And there's other kids who just aren't that way, which is kind of interesting.
So like you see it too with like the different like sports and like demographics that they come from. It's like you'll see someone who's maybe like a country club sport and they behave very differently in the weight room and when it comes to doing like harder workouts versus like another sport where their
Hey, yo,
sport tends to
country
be a little
club.
bit, yeah, country clubs. And then like the other sports where their sport is a little bit more gritty, right? And
Yeah.
like I'll say endurance sports. If you look at the end of a cross country race or triathlon, none of them look happy. No, all of them are like suffering and barely hanging on, right? And they come in and whatever you tell them to do, like they'll do it and they'll do it well and they like can push their own limits. So it's like that, it's really weird range, right? Where you're working with like these different groups and you're like, man, it usually stems back to like their like what they're used to and what they're accustomed to and what's normal. Like, is it normal to push that hard? It makes me uncomfortable. I'm not going to do it. So they don't. And then others who that's their sport and they're so accustomed to it. And then like you tell them to do something and they do it and maybe a little bit too hard, right? And you have to slow them down. I always say, like, I'd rather have to slow down an athlete than push them.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, and I think what you're getting at is like I think some of it's like a cultural thing, like your little circle of who you surround yourself with. Like in CrossFit, like the cool thing to do is puke with your friends.
Yeah.
Whereas like that's not cool if you're golfing.
Yeah.
Like, dude,
Yeah.
what? He had way too many beers on the course today.
Yeah, for real. Whereas like in school, at least growing up for me, it was like there's like the try hard kids. Like that's what like people would say, like, oh, you're trying so hard. Like I'd be like, running that mile at max effort in gym class every single time. I'd be like making sure I was warmed up fully for it. And there'd be other kids like, why are you doing that? Like I just don't care. Like it was uncool to try hard. Where it's like in CrossFit, it's like the opposite. Like you're cool if you try really hard, which like sometimes it's necessary to try less hard to get better at being maximal.
I'm just thinking of the gyms like, bro, did you see Susie throw up everywhere? She's the best. How cool is she vomited?
Go ring the bell, Susie.
She pooped her pants at the same time she was vomiting. Every hole was spewing something. It was amazing.
Dave, if you have like an athlete, and let's not go to like the group training side of things, but like maybe if you're like one-on-one with like an athlete either in person or remotely, and they're like doing certain things that you would like classify as like soft, and like how might you like go about like a conversation with them, or like how would you like approach it to like try to like course correct a little bit?
Yeah, that's always tough with me because like there's people who are really like direct and real, and I always try to speak the same language as the person or something that they can understand. So if I know someone is going to get super offended or anything like that, I'm going to have to be really careful with how that conversation goes. Or maybe
you
not
have to have a
even
good relationship with them.
Yeah, and that all comes down to really knowing the person that you're working with. So like I'll have some athletes where it's like, okay, like they could handle it. They're pretty good, and it's more of a direct conversation where someone may not be able to, like, they may not respond well to it. So it's more like, okay, I'm not going to tell you directly that I think you're being soft and that you're not going hard enough. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to sprinkle in here and there things that'll have you push yourself, or maybe take on like things that'll push yourself physically, and then things that may push yourself mentally, and have those corrective actions. But it's tough because it really does depend on the person, the relationship you have with them, and how they receive information and how you communicate it.
Yeah. Chris, is this like, is this different from like mental toughness to you?
It can be, right? Like, I think, I hate, I was reading something one time actually by Ben Bergeron. He said, and I agree with this, there's a difference between physical toughness and mental toughness. And so, like, physical toughness are people who can endure high amounts of pain. And people will say, like, you're not being mentally tough. Whereas mental toughness can be someone who fails, and instead of like packing it in and going home is able to overcome something. So I do think there's some nuance to that.
Yeah. For example, and I'll let you get back to your point.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
like in this example, like in maybe Ben Bergeron's mind, or how you think about it, it's like physical toughness might be like you can endure the pain of like this challenging metcon that you're going through, versus mental toughness might be like, I know that I shouldn't do this metcon today because I'm already overreaching and I don't want to, like, I'd rather do the hard metcon, but instead I'm going to rest and recover because that's what's going to allow me to be at my best.
Yeah, I would definitely say like that would be something that might fall into that category, right? And so there's definitely some crossover, right? I do think it's possible to be physically tough and in areas be mentally weak. But I do think people who are generally mentally tough tend to be a little bit more physically tough as well. But there is some nuance there. But yeah, I do think the ability to like kind of get into a workout and be able to kind of analyze, even being honest with yourself, like, so like I did the first open workout, and halfway through afterwards, I was like, yeah, I got soft in the middle there. Like I like took extra long breaks that I didn't need to, because you get so centered and center focused on the fact like this hurts really bad, and focused on all the internal processes of how like you can't breathe, instead of just focusing on the task at hand. That's what ends up slowing you down more than other things usually.
Mm-hmm. It's a good point. Like this isn't just like you're soft or you're not. Like it changes over time. Like what soft means one day might not be the next day.
For sure.
Yeah.
100%. And I think at the end of the day, it's literally just shying away from the difficult thing that you should be doing, or that you know you should be executing on in order to get towards the quote unquote goal that you have, right? And that can look different to different people, but I've had the conversation with people of like, okay, like if you can't do X, you need to then evaluate if Y really should be your goal, because executing on X is what's necessary to get to the goal. And so if you don't want to do that, whether it's like, one thing might be like a high level CrossFitter that has to do like long non-structural work. Like that kind of is what it is, right? Like you don't get to be a semifinals or games level athlete and just never do like zone 2 non-structural work. It's not how it works unless you're on gear, right? So, but the people who can put their head down and know that that's part of the process, and know that like, hey, in order for me to get to my goal and identify with my why, like this is what's necessary, they're the people who get it done. And the people who shy away from it, then it's a conversation of, is this really a goal for you? And if you truly say this is what you want to do, then you got to get tough and do these things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting because like I feel like that's normally the conversation I have with people. It's not like you are being soft. It's like, what was your goal again? Like, remind me of your goal. Like, I know what it is. I'm just like wanting to re-ask them, right? So I'm like, hey, remind me of what you say your goals were, because I want them to say it out loud. And it's like, is this in alignment with those goals, right? And you could pick out like a specific instance of like, hey, could you have held on to those overhead squats in the workout? you could have. Why didn't you? Right?
Yes.
Like, this was supposed to be a high effort piece. You're capable of holding on, right? We have everything set up where you can do that. Why didn't you do it? Right?
Right.
A conversation like that it's not, and again, that obviously needs to be, like Day was getting at earlier, like, it needs to be a delicate conversation with the right athlete, because not everyone's going to respond appropriately to that or like take that well. So you just need to be like, have a good relationship with that athlete and then go about it in a way that's like, I want the best for you. These are what you said your goals was. My job and what I want for you is for you to get to your goals. The way you're acting right now is not in alignment with those goals. So either we need to be realistic and change our goals, or you have to change the behavior.
Right.
And otherwise, like, I'm just like blowing smoke, right? Like, I'm not actually helping you get to your goal if like you're continuing to do this thing that's out of alignment and we don't address it.
Right. And that was something, like, before Day hopped off, I wanted to touch base on, because you guys were talking about, like, youth sport athletes, but then Day kind of like people's backgrounds. I think for me, like, and I'm sure you could identify with this, being a parent, like, that's something where from the jump, I want to impress upon my kids, like, giving your full effort is not like, giving your full effort is not like a maybe I will or maybe I won't thing. It's like, no, whatever you're doing, you do it to the best of your ability. That might not be the best in the world, and that's okay. But you don't want to walk away saying like, well, I didn't really care that much. Like, even as a kid, I never understood that. Like, people who brag, like you said, people who bragged about like, I barely tried. It's like, why is that cool? Like,
yeah, I feel like it's just covering up an insecurity somewhere.
100%. And so like for me, it's like, if you have a kid, putting them in situations where they face adversity at a young age is super important, because the stakes are really low. Like, a kid who's struggling, I'm struggling to come up with a good example right now, but like, if someone is struggling with their first grade math homework, right? Instead of giving them the answers, allowing them to kind of struggle through it and figure it out is so low of risk, or low stakes, versus or even if you were to look at sports, right? Like, someone who is wrestling and they're in second grade and they're, figuring out how to fight and how to like overcome obstacles and work hard is so much lower risk than the high school state finals, right? And it's like, you're going to want to have those skills when you get to that point. And if you don't have those skills because everything was done for you, or was always like a fabricated situation to make sure you were succeeding, then you're actually never going to get to your true potential when the chips are down. And then to extrapolate that out further, like in life, like the state finals and the stakes there, it is nothing compared to, I lost my job, how am I going to pay my mortgage? Or, my wife is sick and in the hospital, and I have to figure out how to pay these medical bills while trying to get my kids to school and to practice, right? Like, that is significantly harder than those other two things, right? And so trying to build up those situations early on to build those skills is super important.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, because I think there could be high level athletes who are incredibly gifted, have really high capacity, and yet aren't really mentally all that resilient. And I think that probably happens more in other sports, but I think it also happens in CrossFit at times. But I think the people who are really great in any sport, regardless of what it is, have both. Like, they have the mental capacity to do the thing year after year, day after day. I actually just saw a clip on Instagram of Michael Phelps saying that he went 5 years without missing a training session. And I don't know if I would have believed that if it didn't literally see a video of him coming out of his mouth. Like, that's pretty bonkers to think about.
Yeah.
But that kind of shows, like, to know someone's like at that level, the intensity that they train with at different times, and they're still, even when they're coming off the end of those things, they're still doing that. It's like, that's a good example of, like, obviously most people aren't going to be that, but that's a unique circumstance. But the idea being like, just thinking about the amount of mental resiliency it takes to be able to do that day in and day out, and knowing like the amount of, spotlight and all the other stuff and like emotions behind all that, just to, yeah, like I think sometimes people think that they're being, they're doing more than they think, or they're like better than they think, or they think a little bit more highly of themselves than they should at times.
Yeah.
Where it's like, it'd be easy for me to look at it and be like, I'm working really hard. I'm doing all this stuff. Like, I'm not being soft at all. And like, to a large degree, that might be true. But also it's like, there's ways every single day that I'm soft. And if I took the steps to like rid those things out, that I'm going to like progressively improve in like very key aspects of like business, fitness, life, relationships, like all that stuff.
For sure. And that's like, I think you hit the nail on the head. Anyone who is the top at anything, they possess both. Because you have to be able to see things and outthink your opponents or your competitors, right? And so you have to be able to have the mental capacity to do that. But then you also have the physical attributes to execute, right? That's why people love Michael Jordan so much. Like, if you watch the Bulls documentary, the man was out of his mind, like out of his mind. Like, he just was so laser focused. Or like if you follow any of Kobe Bryant stuff, like I saw a video one time how I guess the Lakers won a game and a bunch of the young guys on the team were like, dude, you should come out to the club with us. Cause he never, like, at a certain point, he didn't really go out. And to help build like team camaraderie, he was like, all right, I'll go out with you, but you got to get up with me the next day. and he was known for getting up at and being in the gym at like 5 a.m. And so the kids were like, oh, all right. And thinking he was kidding. And then like the next day he's like banging on their hotel doors, like, let's go. So, that's a guy, obviously it's a story. And these are just like, it feels like those guys are all the way out here, right? Cause they're NBA basketball players, but the point still remains the same, that it's like, they have unique physical gifts that put them in an opportunity to be really good. But what separated them, and this was part of the talk we had at camp as well, what separated them was what was between the ears, right? Another good example is Tiger Woods, right? Like, you see, like when Tiger Woods was destroying everyone, and then when he had his incident with this car accident, his marriage falling apart and all this stuff, he was still good, but he was never the same guy again. And I think a lot of that was like, he had this insane level of confidence that when he was walking down the fairway with his red shirt on, like, that's why people just like wilted. And then when he lost that edge is when things were a little tougher for him. So yeah, what goes on between the ears and where you're being soft, and again, it could look different every day, is where points are won and lost.
Mm-hmm. So I wrote this down. I thought it was worth reading verbatim as I was just kind of prepping for this. And one of the questions I wrote was, what does a healthy relationship with effort, discomfort, and pain look like for a competitive athlete? Which I think, if nothing else, athletes should be asking that of themselves.
Yeah.
I wrote it that way because they're all different. Effort is not equal to pain.
Mm-hmm.
Effort is different from discomfort. Pain is different from discomfort. So to like understand each one of those and like what is an appropriate level for what you're doing and like what you're engaging in, and like to be able to understand it but not necessarily be emotional to it, I think are all like incredibly valuable like soft skills to have as an athlete.
Yeah, 100%. Especially because, right, Dave was kind of talking about it, but when it comes to CrossFit and how you have to have there is an aspect of physical adaptation. Like, you have to get stronger, you have to do these, the mindset of like, I feel like crap, so I'm just gonna grind because that's what I'm supposed to do. Sometimes you mitigate your results because you haven't threaded that needle correctly. And so, yeah, being able to have a good relationship with all three, to know when to hold them and know when to fold them, it is a good thing to have.
Yeah. And I always go back to this, but I know very, very few people who do that on their own effectively. Like, you need someone else, like even people who were big names in CrossFit who like didn't have like an individualized coach that they worked with. They still had people behind the scenes that they were helping, like, make day-to-day decisions and to like help them with the things that they needed to like address in their day-to-day. And like, I think the bottom line is everybody who's gotten to a fairly high level in our sport, or really any sport, has people that they can trust, that they can go to for decision making and just like navigating their day-to-day training. Like, should I do this extra Metcon? If you're like writing your own training, you're like, kind of sounds like a good idea, but I'm kind of cranky with these joints right now, and I might have to get up early tomorrow. And like, obviously, like there's a million factors. So the more you can outsource some of that thinking, where it's like, you know, ship it off to somebody who can make the decision for you, where it's like, okay, I have a coach. This is my plan. Once I'm through with my plan that I can execute to the best of my ability, I'm done for the day, right? And if I feel like I need something else, I need to be communicating with my coach to figure out what that thing is, right? And I might just be being antsy, and my coach can hopefully just tell me like, no, you're doing enough. Or, hey, you know what? You don't feel great. Let's pull this out, right? And they can make adjustments for you. But I think starting with the conversation is the place to start.
Yeah, definitely. Having someone who has a bird's eye view or can remove the emotion from the decision is super important, because then you just look at the facts.
Yeah. Yeah. And maybe we'll revisit down the road, again, those three specifically. And I just kind of like pulled them out of the air, but I think they are a pretty good snapshot of like what an athlete deals with, that effort, discomfort, pain. Because again, I think a lot of people don't fully understand the differences and how at the same time they interplay, and that you're dealing with potentially all three of those at the same time. So I think, again, it takes a mature athlete to understand the differences, but I also think that a coach can help athletes accelerate the learning in like how to figure out and how to think about if they're actually truly being soft about something, or if they're just like, you know, it's just sort of a reality that they're dealing with, and not necessarily that they're not being like mentally or physically tough. Anything to add, Chris?
That's it, man. Don't be soft.
Thanks for listening today. If you're someone who just started listening to the show, I would encourage you to subscribe so you can stay up to date. If you're someone who's been listening for a while, I would encourage you to rate and review the show. And lastly, the best thing that you can do to support our work is also the best thing that you can do for your performance. And that is by hiring one of our coaches. Until next time, stay the course.